Hi, I'm Jay, and I'm here to talk about the charging and the start system in a Ford 54 to 64. These are the Y block years in the 8-cylinder. There also were some 6-cylinder motors. They all essentially wired the same way. Um, 32 to 53 were the flathead years. Okay, so in 54 they changed the way they wired the start system a little bit. Okay, so we're going to start over here with the alternator. So the alternator has an output on the back, and it's got 2 pins, and then you ground that alternator. You got to make sure that you always ground that alternator, even if you have to put another ground all the way back to the battery. So to wire this up, you just simply take a heavy 10 gauge wire to a fuse. Always make sure you put a fuse in here. So we'll say this is a 100 amp alternator. So this would be a 125 amp fuse. Okay, so you always want it to be 25% larger than the output. Gives you the headroom. Okay, so then you're going to come out of the fuse, and we're going to come over here to, we'll just call this a battery bus. All right, so the output of the alternator connects directly to the plus side of the battery. Plus side of the battery connects directly to the battery side of the solenoid. Okay, that's the start solenoid. Okay, there's 2 pins on the back of this, on the top of this alternator, that connect directly to the regulator. Okay, one is a sense wire. It's a red sense wire. You just connect that to the back, and the other, here's a plug here. So the red sense wire just goes to the back of the alternator. The white wire is going to connect over either to the plus side of the battery or to the key switch. It doesn't matter, except if you're running Protronics, then it does matter. All right, this has a diode in it, meaning that the power can only go one way. It's a one-way check valve. It comes from the battery voltage into the alternator, right? Not the other way around. Okay, so this connects here, and then this would then connect. We're just going to make it simple here. We'll just connect it to the plus side of the battery. All right. So when the key, we're going to get into the key switch, but when the key switch is on, the plus side of the battery gets voltage. The negative side of the coil, of course, comes down here to the distributor. The other side of the distributor is grounded. Okay. So as the points open and close, it expands and collapses the coil inside the ignition coil, and that's what creates the spark. And so you need to have a wire that comes out of the coil over the distributor. Okay, again, these are polarity sensitive. Make sure that when you're, a lot of times you're moving from a positive to a negative ground, make sure that you got your coil in there right. Negative side of the coil goes to the distributor. All right. Okay, so now the battery's got to get grounded, so we're going to go ahead and ground the battery. All right. One thing about grounds, everything has to be grounded well. If you got a problem with the ground, you're going to have a problem with the alternator, you're going to have a problem with your starting system. All right, so make sure that all these grounds tie off, because in these early days they didn't run ground wires. They just ran everything to the chassis, and the problem is they get crud underneath them, and then they don't ground well. So you might look at it and say, oh, it looks like it's grounded, but if it's got any kind of corrosion underneath it, you've got resistance, and you have to make sure you don't have that. Okay, so now we have a simple key switch. They got rid of the push button in 54. I think maybe some trucks may have had some push buttons later on, but we'll just say this one doesn't have a push button system. So typically the key system had an accessory. It had a run and a start. Okay, so you turn the key to start. It provides voltage. Depends on what solenoid you have, but we're going to say that it is our solenoid. We'll just say this is grounded. Okay, then this comes over here and connects here. This needs to have power to it, so we need to get power off of our 12-volt bus, right? It has to connect to the key switch. So when you turn it to start, you're going to get a path down here and down to the starter. It's going to go through the coil inside here to ground, and then it's going to connect this to the starter. Okay, so now you're going to get 12 volts here. These solenoids are just relays, so they take a lot of current, because it takes a lot of current to turn a starter, so you can't just have a flimsy little switch. So you need to have these robust solenoids to be able to take the battery current and connect it across down to the starter. Okay, so then when you release the key, it takes the power off of the solenoid. The solenoid opens up, and then it gives it a path, and actually this path is actually, when you're starting it, you actually get a ignition source to run. Okay, so you turn the key switch, you get power down to the solenoid, connects the starter. It also gives you power over to the plus side of the coil. All right. Let's kind of review. Now we're going to go ahead and start it and test everything. So we'll say this was a 100 amp alternator. Okay, and they're rated at 14.1 plus or minus. Okay, 14.1 to 14.5, somewhere in there. They put out 14.1 to 14.5. We don't call these systems a 14 volt system. We call it a 12 volt system because that's what the battery is. Okay, but the reason the alternator has to put out higher voltage is if it was the same as the battery, it wouldn't charge it. So the battery, fully charged battery, is 12.6 volts, not 12 volts. So if you go buy a brand new battery down at the local store and it tests at 12 volts, it's essentially dead. It's discharged. 12 volt battery is fully discharged. It has to be 12.6 to be fully charged. So you want to make sure that you fully charge that battery before you start doing any tests. All right, so you want to have a voltmeter. It's always a good idea to have a voltmeter. And you want to test the voltmeter from the back output of the alternators before you start it. And you should be able to get battery voltage right there. So you should get 12.6 volts, right? So you're going to get that path right through here, and we're going to get 12.6 volts. We're going to go ahead and start it and run it and bring the RPM up a little bit and measure the output of the voltage here now. And it should be 14.1 plus or minus volts. Okay, so that's the output. That's what it should be getting. So that's what goes to the fuse, and that's what charges your battery. If you don't have 14.1 volts there when you are running it with some RPM, you've got a problem somewhere. And the biggest problem is you probably have a ground problem. So always check the ground. If this thing jumped up to, let's say, 16, 18 volts, you also have a ground problem. So what's happening is that regulator in there, it's trying to charge that battery, and it's going to a short. So it will just keep trying to put the power out, the voltage out. So if you're not getting the right voltage, more likely you got a ground problem between your alternator and your battery. Sometimes you got to run a separate ground all the way back to your battery, or a separate ground through your engine and your chassis. Make sure that, or put a voltmeter on and test it. Okay, so now you got 14 volts here. Come over here. It should be close to 14.1 volts. You might get a little bit of a line drop in there, but you're going to end up with 14 volts to your battery. So now your battery is going to charge. That's essentially it. One quick way you can tell whether the alternator is charging, okay, when it's running, take a pocket knife carefully and just lay it on the back of the alternator where the bearing surface is, okay? And if you lay that pocket knife on the back of that alternator, back here on that bearing, and it's running, you're going to get a magnetic pull. That tells you that this alternator is charging, okay? It's a real quick way, but we really recommend that you use a voltmeter so you make sure that you know that it's working correctly. Okay, well, thank you so much for watching. You can reach us at vintageautogarage.com.